JT's Minnows and Red Worms. I was out here last time with my scooter. This time, I see they've added a bike to their decorations. Very nice. Pleasant Hill is truly pleasant, especially with that pretty sky behind it. And all the birds that are going to be here through the duration of this video. Unfortunately, they are kind of pleasant. Today, I want to do a follow-up on my scooter, my genuine Rattler scooter, Rattler 200i, because believe it or not, it's been 1 year since I purchased this scooter and since I had it out here filming. It's actually been a little over a year and 2 months since I purchased this and started riding it, so I thought I would celebrate by going over just how it's gone. Have I had any problems? Are there any things I don't like about it? Do I still like all the stuff that I said I did before? Well, I've created a list, 10 things in no particular order that I think will explain my experience with this scooter after 1 year. And in that 1 year of riding, I have put 1,637.1 miles on this scooter. And you learn things after a year and 1,600 miles that you just didn't know starting out. More experience. And I thought I would share that because there's just not a lot out there about this scooter. Most of what is out there, other than my videos that I've made on, I think I have about 4 videos. Other than those, it's mostly dealers that are trying to sell you the bike. Now, I'm not saying they're being disingenuous. I'm just saying they're a dealer trying to sell you the bike. So they're going to give you the dealer spiel, all the details, the factory specs and such, but they're not going to be able to give you a year and 1,600 miles worth of experience. I'm going to start out here with number 1 on the list, and everything else is in no particular order, but I would say this is definitely number 1 because it was my great unknown. You see, Genuine Scooter Company is a brand I know well. I've owned their Stella. I know plenty of people that have had buddies. I've had a Rough House recently that I no longer have. Just in case you wondered what happened to the Rough House, it is no longer in my possession. Currently, this is my sole scooter. So no more 50cc, no more 2-stroke. It's all Rattler, all 4-stroke, all fuel-injected fun, and the rounded up 200 cc's. But Genuine Scooter Company, typically their scooters have been made in Taiwan by PGO. This is a China scooter, a mainland China scooter. And there's a term that usually goes with China scooters. It's called Chinesium. And I used to sell Chinesium scooters, so I know all the ins and outs. And what I'm talking about is the little cheap scooters you buy off the internet for $1,000 now. It used to be $699. Shipped to your door. Now it's about $1,000, $1,200, maybe even $1,500. But those little cheap scooters, they typically just don't hold up well. And that made me wonder what happens when Made in China meets Genuine Scooter Company, because that's exactly what's happened here. With this Rattler 200i, made in China, well, I can tell you the Chinesium effect is not in effect with this scooter. This has been a very nice scooter with one exception that we're going to talk about. It's not a super big deal killer, but otherwise, this has been performing well. It's been riding well. I don't have any of the telltale traits of Chinesium, which somewhat blends us into number 2, which is the plastics. Also kind of has to do with the cheap Chinese scooters. Creaky. I'm pressing hard. You don't hear anything. Look down here. I mean, I'm actually pressing so hard I'm wiggling the front tire, and other than a little gravel sounds, there's no creaking anywhere on this scooter. It is a stout-built, well-built scooter. It doesn't have creaking, which is a big thing I worry about with plastic bikes. I'm a Vespa guy. The metal scooters, even my Stella, kind of an old Vespa type scooter, metal, these plastic ones, I worried about it here. Listen to that headset. I mean, I'm pressing hard and nothing. So no Chinesium and no cheap plastic here. It's holding up well, even the finish. Gorgeous and hasn't scratched up, still nice and smooth. Even this piano black, I mean, look at that. Still looking good. And the performance has held. Number 3, miles per gallon. I was getting right at about 82. It was 82 point something. And the last video I updated, and I've been keeping up with it, or kept up with it for a while, at least 15 tanks worth, except for the one that I didn't log where I accidentally reset the trip meter. I think that was when I put the battery lead down on this thing so I could have a battery tender on it. But this was an average of 82 point something. I quit keeping up with it after about 1,200 miles, but I have done two just randomly that I've kept up with over the last 400 miles, and it was still 82 or above. So the miles per gallon, really good for the size engine this is and for how fast it goes. Very economical, very efficient, as a scooter should be. Brakes. Now, if there's one thing that those dealer videos do mention, they mention that these brakes really bite. They are stout. Front and rear disc brakes on this bike. Now, this does not have anti-lock brakes. Some people depend on anti-lock. I prefer to not have it and let my experience guide me. This does not have anti-lock. It doesn't have that thing that a lot of scooters are going to that I don't like, where when you apply the rear brake, and on a scooter, this is not a clutch, it's the rear brake. A lot of scooters now are going to this thing where you apply the rear brake and the front brake automatically also applies. I don't like that. I prefer, like I said, to let my experience guide me. But it is important to note that these will bite in real quick because they're very stout brakes, but they don't have any safeguards and they don't have the new amenities like that dual braking thing. But I don't like that. You never know when you're coming across gravel. Look, this applying and also applying that. There are situations. My buddy Miles was on his scooter, his vintage 1961 scooter, and called me one day and said, I just about died. I could literally hear that all the blood had drained out of his face, even on just a voice call. And he said that had he have not been able to lock up his rear brake only and kick the rear end of that scooter around, he would have been part of the front of a car that ran a red light. So I don't like the dual applying. It just doesn't know all the situations that you might run into, stuff like this. Very slippery. If there's a little patch of it, I might see it. I might need to brake and brake hard at that given point, but I also know what I'm doing and will be able to brake properly without something trying to guess what I need. The main point of this is that this has front and rear disc brakes, and they are probably the beefiest scooter brakes I have ever ridden. But there is no ABS, so note that. But if you like brakes that really can brake, this is definitely a bike to consider for that. The headlight. Now this is important because a lot of scooters just don't have good headlights. This one not only looks stylish, it looks wicked, kind of like something out of Battlestar Galactica, but this really lights up. I'll try to edit in some footage here. Both the low beam and the high beam. And I can tell you, my roughhouse, my genuine roughhouse, even the high beam wasn't as strong as the low beam on this scooter. And on a lot of scooters, like I said, just headlights seem like sometimes an afterthought. This bike definitely shows up, comes in handy on group rides. It has the pass feature, so I can press on this and flash. If I'm coming up to an intersection, there's a lot of cars, and I start to think maybe I have that one open mouther that's just going to stare right at me and pull in front of me. I can flash, and these lights are so bright that I think it's bailed me out a couple of times and definitely made some group rides safer. The headlights number 5, number 6 would be the turn signals. Now this bike has turn signals integrated into the body that are not hooked up for us in the US here from the dealer, unless your dealer hooks them up. We have DOT pod turn signals, front and rear. And they are a standard incandescent bulb. These, though, really bright. I had my dealer hook them up, and they flash at the proper time in sequence with each other. And I think the double turn signals gives me extra visibility. And on group rides with vintage Vespas, I'm always asked, do you have your turn signal on when we're at a red light? Because some of those old bikes don't even have turn signals. This bike does. They are super bright, and there's even a hazard feature that'll light them all up. Makes it even better. And some have asked if I'm going to shave off these factory turn signals since I have those lower ones hooked up. No, I'm going to leave them. I think this is so much visibility. I like it. Plus, these DOT turn signals, they're tucked up out of the way. on this bike that just don't really look out of place. They just kind of disappear up under there. But you gotta love those. Just looks so good. Somewhat of an intangible to some people, but to me, this is a big deal coming from vintage bikes, the Aerodynamics. Now, this is a very modern looking scooter, and it looks aerodynamic, but I've been on scooters that looked aerodynamic that were definitely not. This one cuts right through air. Whenever I'm on group rides and I see other riders, a wind gust or a truck or something will come by, I notice I buffet significantly less than they do. And I think that is attributed simply to the design of this scooter. It's so streamlined, built kind of like a rattlesnake here at the back, but definitely aerodynamic. It cuts through the wind and doesn't catch wind, at least in a scooter kind of way. I will tell you, you're sitting upright on a scooter, so I will catch air, but the scooter doesn't. Cuts right through it, and the aerodynamics with this modern styling, a benefit. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see up in here, but this is a fuel-injected scooter. It's my second fuel-injected scooter, and I think I'm kind of sold on the fuel injection. Get outside of vintage, and I'm going to make it a demand from this point forward. I don't know how well you can see it, but it says so right there, 91 octane. That's not Ron, it's octane. And 91 octane means for people like me that like to run non-ethanol, that presents a problem. There used to be a gas station that had 93 non-ethanol. Now it's down to 90. That means I need to go with ethanol-based gas on this. That's a concern, especially on a scooter. You know, scooters can tend to sit for months sometimes. I mean, the average rider, when it gets super cold, they're just not going to ride. Think about it. How many motorcycles do you see in the spring and the fall when it's perfect temperatures? But then when it's super hot, you don't see as many, but you still see some. But then when it gets super cold, you rarely see someone out on a motorcycle. Same thing with scooters. And that engine sitting up and that gas tank sitting there with ethanol gas in it, if this were carbureted, that would mean it's going to present problems, going to start gelling up. Fuel injection completely mitigates that. I'm a big fan of the fuel injection on this engine. Talk a little bit more about this engine with number 9, and that has to do with the automatic transmission, technically part of the engine, because it's built onto the side of it. And this sort of goes back to the Chinesium. Normally on a Vespa or something like that, I wouldn't worry with it, but at 1,600 miles, I can tell you, on a traditional cheap Chinese scooter, that would be the point to start thinking about a belt or about rollers. I would definitely, at 1,600 miles, start seeing a slight decrease in my top speed on the traditional Chinese cheap scooter belt. On this one, and I keep saying cheap scooter, and I know this is $3,200, but I'm just talking about the general consensus on Chinese-built scooters. This one, I haven't seen any decrease in performance in top speed, and I haven't seen any of the telltale signs of variator rollers wearing. It's still running just like it ran when I first got it, which is perfect. That makes this CVT definitely so far a good CVT. I think when I get to about 2,200, I'm going to need to inspect the belt and possibly inspect the rollers at that point. But so far, it looks like this is going to be a very long-lived transmission before service is needed. So we'll cover that when I get to it. But for right now, that's putting it on the good list, definitely. That was number 9. Now we're going to get to the number 10 thing, and that's the Nimbleness. Now this isn't a small scooter. You know, there are small frame scooters, and then there are large frame scooters, and then there's ginormous scooters. I'm not talking about a Suzuki Bergman or something like that. Those big scooters, they're more just automatic motorcycles to me. When we're talking true traditional little scooter, it's not the tiny, tiny scooters that are known for their nimbleness, but this does still have some nimbleness. Those 12-inch tires and this 52-inch wheelbase. Now, just for comparison, a standard small frame scooter is going to have around a 47-inch wheelbase, and that's why they get their super nimbleness. And 2, they might have 10-inch wheels. Now scooters are having 12, 13-inch wheels. I know there are some that are larger, but I'm talking just traditional scooter type stuff. This one with 52, I think it's about the peak that you could go and still have the nimbleness, because I know my Vespa GTS 300, that had a 54-inch, and I could definitely tell it wasn't as nimble as a scooter. I think if you go above 54, you definitely step outside of that range. And just for comparison here, a Honda CBR 300 has a 55-inch wheelbase, and a Honda Rebel a 59-inch wheelbase. And if you don't think scooters are nimble, just find someone with a scooter and start driving it in circles in a parking lot. And you'll find out real quick, it can usually run tight circles way more so than a motorcycle, a traditional motorcycle. So what I'm getting at here with the nimbleness is because this was larger, and by larger, I mean it's enough room to sit back, have a very nice saddle, and a lot of foot room where somebody like me that's 5'10" doesn't have to scoot back on the saddle. I think if you're probably up to 6 feet, you'll fit perfect on this, which, as I've said, a lot of scooters are very small. They don't fit larger riders well. This one does, but it still maintains the scooter nimbleness. Not as nimble as a very small scooter, but nimble enough to definitely ride like a scooter. And yes, I know there's more to it than just wheelbase. There's tire size, there's rake of the fork, and things like that. But when it comes to scooters, just trust me, the wheelbase does matter, and this is at a good sweet spot, and this turns quite well. And I was a little curious because I know people have ridden the Hooligan and said it felt like a larger bike. Well, it's got a shorter wheelbase than this bike. So that's why I was wondering, and why I'm sharing with you, that this is still scooter nimble, scooter fun, but with a large frame comfiness. So after a year, that's 10 things that I think stand out to be very good about this scooter. And it's still a fun riding bike, performing super, super well, and I'm happy with that. But that's not to say there aren't a couple of nitpicks, and maybe even one problem. Nitpicks, the factory mirrors, they look good. They have this nice vented look to the arms, but they're just not very adjustable. I'm 5'10". I don't know the width of my shoulders, but I know that I couldn't see out the back. I made a video where I talked about changing to these, and they have that snakeskin appearance, just like the inside texture on the scooter, which is good. But those factory mirrors, they clearly look good, but whoever picked them for the bike didn't ride it or didn't sit on it to see if they were actually going to be very functional. They weren't. So I'm going to say that's a nitpick. They do look good, but just didn't work good. These were cheapies off Amazon. They've worked great, and they look good. I think they fit the scooter quite well. So that's definitely a nitpick because it's something I had to change. Another nitpick with the storage, not this under seat storage, which you can't hold a full face in, but it's okay storage, better than most motorcycles. Talking about storage up here, if you're gonna have something, a cubby hole for a phone, this is the USB port to charge a phone, then why make it so small? I meant to bring a second phone, so I'll just have to tell you, my iPhone 13, my iPhone 11, they fit down in here so tight that if I had a huge protective case, they wouldn't. I have a Slimline, a Spigen case that I use, the most slim armor cases you can buy, and they barely go down in there. If I had the larger iPhone, there's no way it would fit down in here. So I'm going to mark that as kind of a nitpick for me because I want to use this, but if I put my phone down in here, I can't get it out. If my phone was any larger, if I had one of the large Android phones, a lot of people have those, wouldn't fit down in here. Also, there's no rack at the rear end. There's 2 grab rails. They're pointy. I like it. It goes with the back end here, fits in with the whole Rattler rattlesnake thing, especially that snake skin. I think it works, but for many people, they're going to want a rack. There is only really one option, 2 options now. I noticed they do have one with a backrest, which would look hideous on this bike, in my opinion. But there is a rack if you want a box or something back here. You have to buy an aftermarket rack. That's not a problem. The problem is if you want panniers, There's no side rack for this. There's only this wraparound pannier. And that means it's going to rub up against this plastic, this nice glossy plastic, and this logo here. I don't like that. I wish that they did have some metal racks that would work on the side, but they don't. So rack and front storage, very limiting. Another nitpick is with parts. Now this isn't a very widespread scooter, at least at this point. So when it comes to parts, and it's very new, so when it comes to parts, your only source is really Genuine Scooter Company. They have a Scooter Works website. You can get like brake pads, spark plugs, the most basic of things, but even a headlight bulb for this scooter, you're going to have to go through the dealer to get those parts. The variator rollers, unless I upgrade this with the NYC kit, or NCY, I always get that backwards, NCY kit, I want to go with stock, stick with stock on this, so I'm even going to have to get variator rollers from the dealer. That means parts are going to be premium priced, so that's something to note. This is such a new bike, and Genuine has complete control over it because they're the only one that has this bike. They're the only source for parts, and that means a bike that really in the dealer scooter world is kind of an affordable scooter, at least in its class. For what you get, you're going to have to pay premium when it comes to parts. So note that, and I'm going to make that a nitpick even though I knew that going in. But it's something to factor in. Oh, another thing, this is something I only recently discovered, and it has to do with the tag. It's time for tag renewal here for me. I went to renew this online, and it wouldn't let me because there was no source for estimated value. So I'm going to have to go down to the tag office for this bike. And that's just because it's such an oddball out there. There's not a lot of them. So note that. Parts, things like that, if you bust up some plastic or something, not going to be easy to find used ones like it would be for something like a Honda Ruckus or something more common. This Rattler, still unique, still its own bike. And my mic died, which I guess is good timing because I've just shared with you the things that I like after a year with this bike. And the few nitpicks that I have. Well, it's actually time to get to the one bad thing. And it's outright strange. I've never experienced this on any scooter before. And it's such an oddball thing that at first, I thought my headset bearings were going bad. The reason I thought that, if you've ever ridden a motorcycle or a scooter with bad headset bearings, you know what I'm talking about. If you go to turn at low speed, there's the resistance. So it's very easy to overturn because you're fighting the resistance. And then end up putting too much pressure there. It's a headset bearing thing. It's just kind of common. Or the roughness when you steer right to left. Well, it didn't have the roughness, but it did have the resistance. And it ends up. These tires require 32 psi of pressure. And that's 32 psi front and rear. Now, what's different about these Kenda-Kendas, yeah, Kenda-Kendas just like on our bikes, is the tread here. It's not really off-road. These are street tires, but they have kind of that off-road tread to them a little bit, at least enough to look off-road, which rides a little rough when they're new, but I had these balanced at one service. Now they've all smoothed out. They're pretty good riding, except that it seems like the more miles I put on these and the more they wear, and at the rear they've worn naturally more than up front because there's more weight back there. Well, I'm a person that usually checks things regularly, so I'm always pretty close to the proper PSI, but these really need to be 32 PSI. And as time goes, as things wear ever so slowly, I'm noticing that there's a bizarre non-forgiveness with these tires and the PSI. I'm talking about if it goes down to 30, and remember, 32 is the recommendation, so lose only 2 PSI, and the bike gets so combative at low speed that I think a novice rider could easily crash it. And go on the other end of the spectrum, how about a couple of extra PSI over the 32? Accidentally go to 34, it's going to get twitchy at high speed. And twitchy does accurately describe the high speed over inflation. Again, only about 2 PSI being over inflation. I found that it's fairly forgiving with 1 PSI in either direction, but 2 makes a noticeable difference. Twitchy at higher speeds. At low speed, though, where you get down to where you're not leaning in a turn, so low speed that you're steering in a turn, the reason I thought it was the headset bearings is because there's a resistance, almost like a counter steer, but in reverse. A resistance, and you're constantly pushing against that, so it's hard to not over push against that, and that can lead to some jerkiness at low speed. And again, just from a couple of PSI, which I consider to be a really bad thing. Just air gauges alone, I don't think I have two that give the exact same reading. So think about this. At 1,600 miles, I have to be within 1 PSI for the tires to not feel weird, the bike to not feel weird, so much so that I thought the headset was going bad. And it seems to be getting worse the more miles I put on the tires, so much so that I'm thinking this Rattler is going to need new tires at 2,000 miles. If I have to put new tires on this $3,200 bike at 2,000 miles, I'm not going to be happy, because I don't know if it's just these tires or if it's an overall geometry thing. And as soon as the tires wear, look, years ago, Vespa had a GTS that would get the death wobble until they added bar weight ends, additional bar weight ends onto the end, and then eventually had to revise their fork. I don't know that that's the case here, but I know that something's not right recently, and it has to do with the PSI. So I'm thinking it has to do with the tires, and for that reason, I'm calling that a major bad. Time will tell for now. I'm still really loving this bike overall. Plus, this has a 2-year bumper-to-bumper unlimited mileage warranty from genuine Scooter Company, so I'm not really that worried. I think it will parse itself out over time. I could just be in that middle ground. Plus, seasons are changing. It's cold at night, warmer in the day, and some days are cold, some days are hot. That could play into it. So we will see. That's my 1-year update. Oh, wait. First, we need to look at this bike. I said out here at Pleasant Hill, they had this new bike to go with their little truck, and there's no trespassing sign over there. I'm not going to pass it, but I think I can zoom in enough to see what bike this is. And it looks like this is a what's that say? J.C. Higgins. A J.C. Higgins bike. Never heard of J.C. Higgins. It definitely looks old. Also looks like a super cool little bike. I can't tell if there's a taillight on there. I don't think there is, but I do like their basket and how they've made it ornate with all the flowers. A fitting tribute to what is an excellent pull off to the side of the road and enjoy the beauty place, Pleasant Hill, and also a good place to stop and show you my 1-year update with the genuine Rattler 200i, a scooter that I'm still very happy with, but there is that one issue. I'll get that worked out. I mean, it's kind of a minor issue as long as I keep the PSI dialed in within 1 PSI. Only more time will tell, and I'll let you know. I know a few viewers have purchased Rattlers, and a couple already owned one. I'm curious if you've experienced this with the tires. Comment below, let me know, and let me know what you think about this video, about the Rattler. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching KevCentral, and have a great day.